Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the small town of Millbrook, nestled in the heart of the American heartland, the air had for years carried an invisible but heavy weight. That of a muted mistrust between a proud and resilient African-American community and a local police force too often perceived as a force of oppression rather than protection. Millbrook was not a metropolis where tensions erupted in large demonstrations, but a mid-sized town where every glance, every gesture, every police check became a microcosm of past wounds and current fractures. For several years, stories of injustice had been passed on like swelling whispers, filling cafes, churches, and neighborhood meetings. Arbitrary arrests, incessant, sometimes violent, checks, and hurtful words sowed fear in the hearts of the residents. Every young black man knew that, despite his innocence, a simple passage on a street could turn into a nightmare. The local police, predominantly white, seemed locked into a logic of systematic suspicion. Robert Collins, a 43-year-old police officer, epitomized this tense dynamic. Born and raised in Millbrook, he had been with the department for over 15 years. For him, the city was his home, his responsibility, and he never hesitated to use a firm hand to maintain order. His rigid training, his conservative upbringing, and his social circle had instilled in him prejudices he never questioned. Collins saw rules as uncrossable lines and believed that firmness was the only way to control what he called disruptive elements. In his mind, young black men from the East Side were often the prime suspects, no matter the circumstances. On that autumn Tuesday morning, the cool wind swept the dead leaves swirling across the cracked sidewalk. The sky was a heavy gray, ready to pour a light rain, and the atmosphere seemed charged with a barely palpable tension. Collins drove in his patrol car, his hands tight on the steering wheel, scanning the East Side's main street. Modest homes, convenience stores, children playing near a vacant lot. Everything seemed peaceful, but for him, the calm could disguise chaos. It was then that he noticed a man walking purposefully, his back straight, dressed simply in a worn army jacket, jeans, and sturdy shoes. He moved unhurriedly, a serene expression on his face, as if the weight of the world could not reach him. But to Collins, this man represented a potential problem. He didn't recognize the figure, and in his mind, the stranger in this neighborhood was a threat. Without hesitation, Collins slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing on the wet asphalt, a cloud of steam rising into the cool morning air. The car's engine cut out abruptly. He opened the door with a sharp slam, his boots slapping on the wet asphalt. "Hey you," he shouted, his voice imposing on the silent street. "Get down from there." The man stood still on the sidewalk, as if waiting for this moment. Then he turned slowly, his deep, dark eyes meeting Collins's with a calm intensity and quiet assurance. His face, marked by years and hardship, bore the dignity of a man who had faced far worse. "Hello, officer," he replied in a calm voice, without any trace of aggression. "What can I do for you?" Collins frowned suspiciously, anger flashing in his eyes. "I asked you to stop. Why are you walking around like you're above the law? Here, we don't do what we want." The man gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile, a smile of those who know that justice is not in fear, but in truth. "I'm walking quietly, officer. There's no law that says I can't walk." Collins clenched his jaw, his face hardening. He stepped out of the car, his heavy footsteps echoing on the pavement. "Don't provoke me," he said, raising his voice. "Give me your papers." The man calmly reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a laminated card. He held it out to Collins, who reluctantly took it. In the dim gray morning light, Collins read slowly. "Colonel David Marshall, United States Army." The policeman narrowed his eyes, barely containing his annoyance. "A colonel? Are you playing military here now? I remind you that in this town, I'm the one who makes the law, not you." David Marshall stepped forward, imposing himself with his calm presence and natural authority, that of a man accustomed to commanding in far more serious circumstances. "Agent Collins," he said in a calm but firm voice, "I respect your work. But it's time you understood one essential thing. Authority is not based on fear or brute force, but on mutual respect. Your behavior this morning is not only unjustified, but dangerous. A heavy silence fell as several curious passers-by slowed their pace and stopped to observe the scene. The murmur of voices rose softly, the atmosphere becoming charged with palpable tension. Collins felt the weight of his authority waver for the first time. His fists clenched, his fingers tense, betraying his inner turmoil. After a long moment, he looked away, his tone returning to a more measured, almost forced tone. "Very well, this time I'll let you go. But know one thing, Colonel, I'm watching you." David Marshall nodded slowly, saying nothing more. He turned around, his calm, confident steps retreating down the sidewalk as passers-by slowly resumed their walk, some exchanging meaningful glances. Within days of the confrontation, the story of Colonel David Marshall and Officer Collins quickly spread throughout Millbrook. Local newspapers, initially reluctant to directly address the issue of racism and tensions between the police and the black community, were forced to cover the incident after the outpouring of support it generated. Articles, editorials, and even local radio shows picked up on the story, turning it into a powerful symbol of the fight against the systemic racism and police brutality that had plagued the city for far too long. In Millbrook homes, among East End shopkeepers, in churches, and within community groups, the confrontation was passionately discussed. For many, David Marshall embodied a new figure, that of a white man of authority, but one who did not hide behind his rank to impose his law. His calm, respect, and courage had reawakened the hope that dialogue could be possible. David, although in civilian clothes that day, didn't want this episode to remain a mere anecdote. He decided to take concrete action. Using his military network and his contacts in the region, he launched a series of initiatives to bring together police officers and residents. He organized community meetings in neutral locations, church halls, cultural centers, libraries, where everyone could come and share their experiences, listen, and understand. These meetings were sometimes tense, with voices raised, grudges expressed, and wounds raw. But little by little, words circulated, glances softened, and a shared desire for change emerged. To ensure concrete follow-up, David formed a joint committee composed of local elected officials, law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and social justice experts. Their mission: to review police practices in Millbrook, train officers in peaceful conflict management, and create transparent oversight mechanisms. For Officer Robert Collins, these developments were a real internal shock. At first, he remained distant, suspicious, and sometimes even grumpy. He attended these meetings more out of obligation than conviction, with the feeling that his honor as a police officer was being questioned, his reputation being attacked. But little by little, the testimonies he heard deeply affected him. The voice of a mother speaking of the constant fear for her son, of a teenager describing a humiliating arrest, or of a veteran explaining the invisible scars of discrimination. All of these things shook his certainties. Robert then began to reflect. What he had always believed to be the truth was perhaps only a facade. The long hours spent listening, dialoguing, and questioning his prejudices gave rise to a new awareness within him. The path to change was difficult. He had to fight against pride, against habit, against the pressure of his colleagues, who were sometimes mocking. But gradually, he understood that true strength lay not in fear, domination, or violence, but in mutual respect, justice, and empathy. It was a slow, fragile, sometimes painful, but authentic transformation. The small town of Millbrook, long divided, began to see a glimmer of hope. And it was all thanks to one man who dared to walk quietly one autumn morning, and another who agreed to change. A few months later, the town of Millbrook was no longer quite the same. Many challenges remained: social tensions, inequalities, historical wounds, but a new dynamic, fragile but real, had begun to take root. In the streets of the East End, there was a slight sense of calm. Exchanges between police officers and residents, once rare and tense, had increased. Cultural sensitivity training workshops had been set up within the police station, and citizen mediation initiatives were helping to defuse conflicts more quickly. The local community was now actively participating in these processes, fueled by a shared hope. Officer Robert Collins was no longer the same man he'd been the previous autumn. The scars of his shattered beliefs had transformed into new strength. His view of the residents, once tinged with suspicion, had become more humane, more respectful. He had become aware of the richness and complexity of the community he served. He now worked hand in hand with David Marshall, with whom he had forged a professional relationship based on trust and dialogue. David, always firm but kind, had become a key player in this transformation. He never sought confrontation, but he knew how to impose his presence with the quiet authority of a man who carried deep conviction. Together, they led meetings, debates, and concrete actions, encouraging everyone to overcome their fears and prejudices. The road ahead was still long, strewn with obstacles and resistance. Some neighborhoods remained marked by mistrust, and some agents reluctant to change continued to put up a wall. But for the first time in a long time, the residents of Millbrook could glimpse a future where skin color would no longer be a factor of fear or violence, but simply a natural part of their diversity. In this new landscape, every citizen could dream of a life of security and dignity, where justice would not be an empty word, but a reality experienced every day. Millbrook, a modest American town, had begun its slow renaissance, carried by the courage of a man walking quietly and the determination of a police officer to learn to see differently.